Of all the controversial topics I've covered, nothing has drawn the ire of the internet as much as questioning the ethics of horseback riding. In the years since my first video on this topic, I've realized a few things. One, horse people are passionate. And two, there is a lot that I failed to address. In fact, I've been rethinking my approach to this debate entirely. So, is horse riding cruel? Is it vegan? And is there any ethical way to ride a horse? Let's do this. Hi, it's Emily from BitesizeVegan.org, where you can find all the sources for this video and my entire horse riding ethics series. Before we discuss whether horse riding is cruel, I want you to think about another question entirely. Are horses meant to be ridden? You see, the question of whether horse riding is cruel tends to result in heated debate over which methods or schools of riding are best, with riders insisting that horse riding is not harmful if done correctly. Any physical or emotional harm caused by riding horses is due to inexperienced riders, poor use of equipment, or any other number of factors. But all of this debate over how to ride horses properly presupposes that there is an acceptable way to use another being for our own purposes. Even the very question of whether horse riding is cruel risks implying that the only problem with riding horses is whether they suffer. The foundational ethical issue with horseback riding isn't whether it hurts horses. It's the presumption that they are ours to use in the first place, that horses are meant to be ridden. We'll explore this further throughout this video, but I wanted to plant this seed before we get too lost in the weeds, and before the vast majority of YouTube viewers leave the video entirely, and they're gone. Let's start by addressing head-on 4 common arguments in defense of riding horses. The most basic argument in defense of riding horses is that horses need exercise. This also comes with the most basic refutation. So do dogs, cats, and human children. Yet we've somehow found a way to provide such necessary physical activity without mounting any of them. Yes, horses, like all animals, need exercise, and if riding them is the only way they are allowed to receive that exercise, then yes, it's more beneficial than being stuck in a stall 24/7. But the choice of being ridden or receiving no exercise at all is a human-created false dichotomy. The reason horses even need humans to provide them with exercise is that we have confined them in the first place. A second argument is that riding provides horses with an enriched environment and stimulation. As with exercise, these are valid needs of any living being, and fully achievable without being mounted by a human. Again, if horses weren't deprived of enrichment and stimulation by humans in the first place, they wouldn't need to be given enrichment and stimulation by humans. Now, I know I've been a bit flippant in my responses to the first 2 arguments, but I'm going to take some time on the final 2 because they speak to profoundly important dynamics in how we conceptualize our relationships with horses. The assertion that horses enjoy being ridden comes in many forms, but almost always starts with, "But my horse loves," and insert being ridden, going to shows, wearing a bridle, having a bit, running the barrels, and what have you. Horse riding advocates describe how excited their horses are when they see it's time to go for a ride, listing behavioral signs of enjoyment versus those indicating distress. Rather than debate the meaning of equine body language, let's assume for a moment that a horse does show excitement about being ridden. This excitement has to be viewed within the context of the limitations we've placed upon the horse. What else do they have to look forward to? When your options are staying in a stall all day or getting to go outside, albeit while being ridden, which would you choose? Adapting to the limits of confinement is a survival mechanism in all animals, humans included. Just think of how imprisoned people find ingenious ways to fulfill the need for social and communal interaction, intellectual stimulation, and physical activity. They may very well come to enjoy any time they have outside of their cell and excitedly anticipate things that, to non-imprisoned people, seem trivial or even unappealing. But within the limited framework of confinement, they adapt to stay sane. This reframes the issue entirely to the ethics of domestication itself, something explored by former horse trainer, trader, and rider Ren Hurst in my interview with her.
Most people have no idea that the animals they're spending time with are in an absolute state of learned helplessness, of conditioning that doesn't even allow you to experience their true nature. What you're experiencing is like this empty shell version of the animal in front of you.
Even if we could accurately determine consent from other species, true consent cannot be freely given under unequal power dynamics and constraints. This leads us to what I think may be the most painful defense for riders to confront: the love they feel for their horses and the deep emotional bond formed through riding. To those of you who ride horses, I do believe that you love them. I do believe that you feel a deep emotional connection to them. And I believe that the depth of that love is precisely what makes it so profoundly painful to question the true nature of your relationship with them. I also understand the resistance to having that bond questioned by me, someone with no background in horse riding. So I'll again defer to Ren Hurst.
You have to almost experience a truly free horse to walk away from it. Otherwise, your perception of what horses are and how they behave is really skewed. This is a being you have placed in your control and in your care, and then you call that love. I mean, there's nothing loving about using someone for your own personal benefit. That's not a loving relationship, and it's not an equal relationship.
Riding horses involves using non-human animals for entertainment, emotional fulfillment, even love. But using someone for love is still using someone. Now that we've touched on some of the principal defenses for riding horses, let's explore the main arguments against horse riding. I'll be honest, the most common arguments against horseback riding, which I myself focused upon in my original video and article on this topic, all center upon the physical harm riding inflicts upon horses. Yes, it's important to address the physical consequences horses endure, but focusing exclusively on their physical suffering as the reason to stop riding horses misses the greater ethical issues entirely. Instead of questioning our use of horses in the first place, we end up nitpicking the appropriate terms of their exploitation, arguing about the best and worst methods of riding, the proper and improper use of equipment, etc. It is the very same trap of all animal welfarism, like humane, free-range, and cage-free labels. Our right to use these beings is seen as a foregone conclusion. The only thing we question is the acceptable ways in which we can use them. With that caveat stated, let's look at the physical impact of horseback riding on horses before further exploring the vegan animal rights perspective. The short answer is yes. Horse riding does hurt horses. Now, the exact nature and degree of the harm, the precise causality, and the proposed methods by which such harm may be mitigated is a long-standing contentious debate that shows no signs of resolution. A major problem with the scientific and medical literature is that it is conducted through the lens of minimizing the harm of horse use in order to prolong that use. It is also framed within the unquestioned constraints we've placed upon horses. Before we get into more detail, I want to again urge you to take a step back and think about another question entirely. If so much has to be done correctly to minimize the harm of riding horses, and no one can actually agree on what that correct formula is, and riding horses is entirely unnecessary in the first place, why are we still so insistent on doing this to them? For the horse racing industry, the answer is clear: money. But for the individual rider, for the horse lover, stop to question why you feel you need to ride. The majority of blog posts and informal articles I came across discussing whether riding hurts horses were written by riders, people who obviously have concerns that their actions are adversely impacting the beings they love. Yet, those posts went on to catalog, sometimes in extensive detail, how exactly to make the riding experience as enjoyable as possible for your horse, how to minimize injury and distress. Some echo the journey of Ren Hurst, progressively using less and less horse tack and adopting more gentle methods, all in an effort to find a justifiable way to still use horses. So let's follow this path and start with the harm of horse tack. If you're not familiar, horse tack refers to the equipment and accessories used on domesticated horses. This includes things like saddles, bits, bridles, and whips. It's worth noting that most horse tack is made from the skin of other non-human animals, further compounding the exploitation. I cover the leather industry in depth in another video. In addition to general wear and chafing, saddles run the risk of causing vascular occlusion, meaning the restriction of blood flow, which can, if prolonged, lead to the necrosis of underlying tissues, meaning the horse's skin and muscles die. Riding bareback without a saddle isn't the answer, as it may actually increase the risk of injury by putting more concentrated pressure on a horse's back than with a saddle. So, to avoid severe consequences such as necrosis, much industry and scientific research goes into designing and educating riders about proper saddle fit and use. The option of just not riding horses at all never even enters the discussion, because we just have to get up on them. I have a video covering bits, so I'll keep this brief. Bits cause pain and damage to a horse's complex cranial nerves, as well as their teeth, tongue, and palate. Facial nerves are very close to the skin, and thus extremely sensitive. Bits provide a perfect example of the incremental negotiation of acceptable exploitation that occurs when viewing a horse's pain as the only problem. Rather than question the domination and control of another being, more and more riders adopt and advocate for bitless bridles. Then, when research hints that perhaps even bitless bridles cause pain, there's another school or device or approach ready to take its place. Riding advocates emphasize that whips and crops should not be used as punishment, only as encouragement. As with all horse tack, there is unending debate over their proper use, with much focus given to the potential physical and emotional harm of misuse. Let's pause for a moment and consider that we are now debating the proper way to whip a being we love. Let's proceed. The most widespread controversy about whips is their use in the horse racing industry, which I've covered in a dedicated video. While the way whips are used within horse racing differs from how they're used in non-competitive riding, recent research into horse pain perception from whips is applicable to the larger issues we've been exploring. There's a long-standing misconception that horses have thicker skin than humans, and thus whips don't hurt them. Not that we should need this to know better, but research has found that this is not the case, with a 2020 study finding no significant difference between humans and horses in either the concentration of nerve endings in the outer pain-detecting layer of skin or in the thickness of this layer. Although horse skin is thicker overall than human skin, the part of the skin that is thicker does not insulate them from pain. Humans and horses have the equivalent basic anatomic structures to detect pain in the skin. 6 years before this study, one of the authors, Paul McGreevy, decided to whip himself while taking thermographic imaging, saying, "My view is that because there's no evidence to the contrary, we must assume that, just as I felt pain and distress from the impact of the padded whip, similar whipping in a horse would also cause pain and distress." While it's validating to now have the scientific verification, I wanted to highlight McGreevy's point. Why not assume that other sentient beings feel pain as we do, rather than continue to harm them unless we've proven to ourselves that it is harm? Now that we've addressed horse tack, what about the act of riding itself? When researching the physical harm of riding horses, I found an astounding lack of consensus and ongoing controversy regarding horse skeletal maturation and growth plate closure rates, diagnosis and treatment of injuries, and the relation of riding and training practices to injury rates. Even a veterinary manual explaining the most common cause of back soreness in the horse is soft tissue damage to the muscles and supraspinous ligament in the horse's back, which are strained while the horse is being ridden, is sure to point out that there is considerable controversy over the diagnosis and treatment of back problems in horses. It's acknowledged that across all equestrian disciplines, the single largest reason for wastage, also euphemistically referred to as loss of horses, is musculoskeletal injury. Yet, horse skeletal maturation rates and damage from riding remain particularly contentious. Many studies and sources declare horses skeletally mature at 2 to 3 years of age based on either the growth plates closing in their legs or their having reached their full height and weight. None of these factors speak to the maturity of their axial skeleton, which includes their vertebral column. You know, the part that you sit on. Or even parts of the pubis that don't fuse until 4.5 to 5 years of age, long after they're already being ridden. I spent days delving into horse skeletal development. I even chased down findings about horse pubic epiphyseal fusion not occurring until 5 years of age that were made in 1897. Yet, well over 100 years later, we're still asking when horses are skeletally mature and basing it off of the earliest fusing plates in their limbs. I've included more detail on my research process and findings on the article for this video if you want to dive deeper. But honestly, those 100 or so hours I spent digging only highlighted the utter insanity of how much time, energy, and effort we humans put into justifying our use of other animals. In the end, the industry, scientific, medical, and even lay rider literature doesn't really refute the harm of riding. It just strives to determine the best way to reduce that harm and prolong the use of horses. The warring approaches to riding, endless studies on training practices, and progressive bargaining of using less and less tack are all manifestations of the same incremental negotiation of exploitation that we perform with all non-human animals. Battery cages are too cruel for layer hens, so we give them slightly larger cages. Still problematic? How about a crowded shed? Still too grim? Let's raise backyard chickens. We barter and bargain and give ourselves happy-sounding labels, doing anything we can to keep using animals, but feel good about it. Within the horse world, a poignant example of this mentality is the United States horse racing industry patting itself on the back for a 23.5% decrease in fatalities over a decade of voluntary data collected by the Jockey Club. Now, there are gonna be fatalities. But, as the Jockey Club Senior Council said, the fact that slightly fewer horses died of fatal injuries while racing indicates that the thoroughbred industry's commitment to equine safety is paying dividends. Not only do we fail to question what we're doing to these beings, but we actually congratulate ourselves for being the heroes in the disasters of our own creation. We swoop in to make their abbreviated lives slightly less miserable, lives that we've made abbreviated and miserable in the first place. By this point, you can probably guess the answer to whether horse riding is vegan. The question, is horse riding vegan, is quite different from the question, is horse riding cruel? Veganism and animal rights oppose any exploitation of sentient beings. It's evident that horses do not need to be ridden. When a horse's basic needs are met without being ridden, horseback riding solely benefits the rider. Whether that benefit is financial gain, entertainment, emotional fulfillment, or even a presumed expression of love, it is exploitation. There is no way to take advantage of someone's captive dependency without exploiting them. Underlying all of the debates over the proper way to train and ride horses is not only the tacit acknowledgement that some degree of harm is acceptable, but also the deeply entrenched and unquestioned presumption that horses are ours to use. Confronting the exploitation of horse use is, I'm sure, profoundly painful. It's likely as traumatic as confronting what we do to animals in the food industry, and elicits just as strong defenses and justifications, even from vegans who continue to ride. Again, I will encourage those of you who ride horses to ask yourself, why? Why do you insist on doing this to them? As much as I'm sure you love them, is this how you express your love for any other being in your life? This isn't about shame. It's about learning to love horses truly unconditionally and allowing them to be their full selves outside of the constraints of who we need them to be. I'll be honest. Revisiting the ethics of horse riding has been an exhausting, challenging, and somewhat maddening experience. My hope is that this video will reach those of you who are still riding, and that you'll find a way to work through your defenses and take an honest look at your relationship with horses. I highly recommend watching my interview with Ren Hurst. Hearing from someone who's been where you are is no doubt more powerful than anything I can say. Please share this video with others who ride, and as much as I joked about passionate feedback, I do want to hear from you in the comments. What are your thoughts on the ethics of horse riding? To stay in the loop about new bite-sized vegan content and updates, subscribe to the newsletter or follow the Telegram channel for the most reliable notifications. Just click subscribe at bitesizedvegan.org. Now go live vegan, and I'll see you soon.